One of depression's nasty tricks is that it can alter the way you think in ways that you're not even aware of, and it creates these negative thinking styles that perpetuate and fuel depression. When a person is experiencing depression, it's almost like they have this nasty little depression gremlin sitting on their shoulder, and the gremlin gets them to think in overly negative ways that just makes the voice of the depression gremlin stronger and stronger and stronger. This is a continuation of our series on skills to overcome depression, and we initially talked about the interrelationship between our behaviors, our thoughts, and our emotions in depression, forming the three sides of a depression triangle. And in the last number of videos, we've been focusing on the thought side of this triangle, discussing ways of improving our awareness of negative thinking patterns, and in the last video, we talked about ways to challenge these negative thinking patterns using a 4-column thought record. Today's video builds on using a 4-column thought record by examining 3 really common styles of thinking that fuel depression. These are distorted ways of thinking, kind of like a mental shorthand gone wrong that makes a person feel more depressed. And the idea is that the more you become aware of these negative thinking styles and thinking patterns, the more you'll recognize when you're doing them, and the more you'll be able to recognize some of these negative thinking patterns in the 3rd column of that thought record, which is the negative automatic thoughts column that often fuel our depression feelings. So the first of these cognitive distortions is called mind reading. And the question I often ask people is, how well do you feel you are at knowing what someone else is thinking? We engage in mind reading all the time, and at its core, it represents a sense of a telepathic power, being able to put ourselves in someone else's head and knowing what they think. Now, the thing is, in depression, mind reading takes the form of knowing what someone else is thinking or feeling. And the thing is, we typically think that what someone else is thinking or feeling is negative. So, for example, a friend passes me by on the street and doesn't say hi to me, so I take that to mean that the friend is ignoring me because they don't like me anymore. I'm putting myself in their head and interpreting the motivation behind their behavior. Now, the thing that makes mind reading challenging is that the interpretations that we make in mind reading are usually possible, but these are possibilities that are given so much greater weight than other more likely possibilities. So, yes, it's possible that my friend saw me and chose to ignore me because they don't like me, but what's more likely is that my friend didn't acknowledge me because they didn't even see me. And one of the big problems with mind reading is that it makes a person feel way more certain than they should about their negative interpretations in these types of ambiguous situations. And this can be particularly problematic in close relationships like marriages. In these types of close relationships, you know your partner so well that you stop checking to ask what they're actually thinking, and you engage in mind-reading predictions of what they're thinking. So my wife is quiet one evening, and I interpret that she's angry with me, but I don't know what I did wrong. So I get a sense of helplessness and despair because I've upset her, but I don't know how to fix it because I don't know what I did wrong to make her so upset. In reality, she may have been upset and quiet because she was unfairly criticized at work and was still processing it, not ready to talk about it. And so what ends up happening is that you become less and less accurate in your mind-reading predictions, while at the same time becoming increasingly more convinced that you know how the other person feels, even though you may be completely incorrect. So if you notice yourself mind-reading, the idea is to stay in your own head. When a person first starts to do cognitive therapy, one of the things they recognize is how difficult and challenging it can be to just recognize what we ourselves are thinking. It's hard enough to be aware of our own thinking patterns that are taking place in our own heads. How much more impossible is it then to know what someone else is thinking? So when you catch yourself mind reading, remember to return back to your own head. The next cognitive distortion is called the fortune teller error. And it's similar to mind reading. It's almost like a person who's engaging in the fortune teller error has some sort of extrasensory perception. But rather than being able to read someone else's mind, the fortune teller is about being able to predict or read the future. In the fortune teller error, I feel that I'm able to predict the future, and in the context of depression, the future is always dark and grim. I continually make negative predictions about what's going to happen, and the more depressed I become, the more negative my predictions become. And one of the nasty tricks about the fortune teller error is that it can lead to a self-fulfilling cycle. So imagine that I'm single and I'm discouraged and depressed about being single. I might think about my future and believe that I'm never going to find someone who's going to love me. I'll never be in a long-term relationship, and I'm going to be single and miserable for the rest of my life. I'm predicting the future, and it doesn't look good. Now think about how that might affect my behavior. Will I feel particularly motivated to put myself out there and try and date? Will I take opportunities to potentially pursue relationships with people who've shown some potential interest in me? Probably not, because I'm predicting that nothing I do is going to be successful. So what's the point in trying? And so I stop dating or pursuing any relationships, which results in me continuing to be alone. And the longer I'm not in a relationship, the more down and hopeless I become about finding a relationship, and it becomes this self-perpetuating cycle. So you can imagine how the fortune teller error negatively affects mood and depression. It tells me that I'm going to fail at almost everything I do, things will never work out for me, and the future is bleak and hopeless. So if you catch yourself engaging in the fortune teller error, the idea is to remind yourself that you don't own a crystal ball. And because you don't own a crystal ball, you're probably not very good at predicting the future. And the third and final cognitive error that I want to talk about is catastrophizing. And what happens in catastrophizing is that a relatively minor event gets blown out of proportion, almost like the mental equivalent of making a mountain out of a molehill. The person takes a relatively small event and then imagines all of the extreme and horrible consequences that could potentially result from the event. For example, I make a mistake at work and I'm worried that I'm going to be fired and I may have difficulty getting another job because I was fired. Now, there are two components to catastrophizing. The first is that I predict the worst possible outcome in the situation. And the second part is that I anticipate that if the negative situation were to actually happen, I wouldn't be able to cope or problem solve the situation, and it will be an utter disaster. As a result, my emotional reaction becomes exaggerated because I'm reacting to an imagined catastrophe rather than an actual event. I react like I've been fired and will never get another job, rather than reacting to making a mistake at work. And because I'm focusing on the imaginary catastrophe, it actually makes me less able to cope with the real event and the real problem. I get so overwhelmed and anxious about potentially being fired for a mistake that it interferes with my ability to actually correct the mistake. So the idea is when you catch yourself catastrophizing, what you want to do is to bring yourself back to the moment that you're actually in and focus on dealing with that event, not what you think the event symbolizes. So these are the first three of the cognitive distortions that are common in depression that we're going to be talking about. And I'll be talking about more in future videos as well. So as you're working on your thought records, keep an eye out for these types of distorted thinking patterns in the third or the automatic negative thoughts column. And like I mentioned, in the next couple of videos in this series, we're going to be talking about various other cognitive distortions or faulty ways of thinking. And so I encourage you to keep an eye out for those videos. In the meantime, if you want a review of how to identify and challenge negative thinking patterns, I'd encourage you to check out this video. So that's all for today's video. As always, thank you for making it all the way to the end of this video, and I will see you in the next one.